The hallway echoed with laughter as Ellie Harper stepped toward the school bulletin board. Her faded sweater hung loose sneakers squeaking on the polished floor eyes, too quiet for the clamor. "Look, the thrift store kid signed up to sing," a voice sneered sharp as a blade. "What's next? A cardboard guitar." Another whispered venom, cloaked in giggles. Ellie adjusted her worn backpack, saying nothing. To them, she was invisible, a shadow in their polished world. But they didn't know her secret. Her voice could hush a storm. If you've ever felt judged for who you are, hit like, share your story below, and subscribe. Ellie's journey is just beginning, and you won't want to miss what's next. The school gymnasium glittered with promise, but for Ellie Harper, it was a world that didn't belong to her. Strings of fairy lights draped the rafters, casting a golden glow over polished bleachers, where students in crisp blazers and pastel dresses whispered and laughed. The air carried the sharp tang of new sneakers and floral perfume, a stark contrast to the faint scent of flower that clung to Ellie's faded sweater. In the small town of Carver, Texas, Winslow Middle School's talent show was more than an event. It was a stage where status was flaunted, and Ellie, at 10 years old, was an outsider in its spotlight. Her home was a weathered trailer on the edge of town, where the hum of a box fan battled the summer heat. Each dawn, Ellie woke to help her mother, Lila, at the local diner, scrubbing counters before the breakfast rush. Lila was a wiry woman with calloused hands and a smile that held stories of harder days. "You don't need money to have heart," she'd say, her voice steady as she kneaded dough. Ellie carried those words like a shield, but they did little to dull the sting of her classmates' glances. Her sneakers patched with duct tape squeaked louder than her voice, and her backpack, a hand-me-down from a thrift store, sagged under the weight of borrowed books. At school, the talent show buzzed with anticipation. Posters lined the halls, their bold fonts proclaiming, "Let your star shine." Students clustered in groups comparing choreography videos on their phones or boasting about private music lessons. Ellie moved through the crowd like a shadow, her brown eyes catching glimpses of a world she didn't fit into. She wasn't poor in spirit, but her clothes told a story her peers were quick to judge. Once she'd overheard a teacher sigh. "Some kids just don't belong in the spotlight." The words had settled in her chest heavy as the dust on her trailer's windowsill. Years ago, when Ellie was 6, Lila had sung her to sleep with an old folk song, "Wildwood Flower," her voice soft as moonlight. "One day you'll sing your own song," Lila had whispered, tucking a strand of hair behind Ellie's ear. That memory was Ellie's secret treasure, tucked away like the notebook, where she scribbled lyrics in careful slanted handwriting. She'd signed up for the talent show on a whim, her heart pounding as she wrote her name on the list, hoping her voice might finally be heard. But as she stood in the gymnasium, the weight of her choice pressed harder. The crowd's eyes were sharp, their whispers sharper. A girl in a sequined skirt tilted her head, her voice dripping with mock surprise. Ellie's performing "What a Lullaby for the Lost." Her friends snickered, their glossy nails catching the light. The girl, Cassidy Wells, was 13 with a smile that cut like glass. Her father owned half the town's real estate, and her confidence filled the room like the chime of expensive crystal. She leaned toward her clique, her words a quiet blade. Maybe she'll sing about scraping plates at the diner. The laughter that followed was soft, but it landed like a slap. Ellie stood near the stage, her hands clasped tight. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was a wall she'd built long ago. A janitor sweeping nearby paused to nod at her, his eyes kind but fleeting. No one else noticed. To them, she was a speck on their polished canvas, a girl who didn't belong in their world of privilege and pride. But that nod, brief as it was, felt like a crack in the facade. It whispered of something they didn't see, something waiting to break free. As Cassidy's laughter faded, Ellie's gaze drifted to the stage where a microphone stood under a single spotlight. The air grew heavier, the crowd's chatter a distant hum. She adjusted her backpack, the weight of her notebook grounding her. The talent show was tomorrow, and the gymnasium would be packed. For now, she stood alone, her heart a quiet drumbeat, waiting for the moment when her voice might finally speak louder than their scorn. Nobody noticed Ellie Harper slip into the gymnasium's shadow, but they all heard Cassidy Wells's voice slice through the chatter. "Is that the diner girl trying to be a star?" she drawled loud enough for heads to turn. The talent show sign-up sheet hung on the wall, Ellie's name scrawled at the bottom in careful pencil. Cassidy stood with her clique, her sequined skirt catching the fairy lights, her lips curled in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The air in Winslow Middle School's gym thickened the hum of excitement, now laced with something sharper, something cruel. Ellie, barely 10, stood frozen near the bleachers. Her faded sweater hung loose, its hem frayed from too many washes. The notebook in her hands, filled with lyrics she'd practiced in the quiet of her trailer, felt heavier now. She'd signed up to sing Wildwood Flower, the song her mother Lila hummed on long nights at the diner. It was a piece of her, a thread to a world where she wasn't invisible. But as Cassidy's words landed, the gymnasium seemed to shrink its polished floors and glittering lights mocking her presence. The laughter started small, a ripple from Cassidy's friends. What's she gonna do? Sing about grease stains, a boy in a crisp polo chimed in his phone already out, thumbs poised to post. Another girl, her hair in a sleek ponytail, leaned forward. Bet she's just here to clean the stage. The words weren't shouted, but they cut deeper for it, each one a needle threading through the crowd. Students nearby glanced at Ellie, then away, their silence louder than any jeer. A few scrolled through their phones, where a group chat buzzed with memes. A photo of Ellie's patched sneakers captioned talent show material. Last summer, Ellie had found an old radio in the trailer park's dumpster. She'd spent weeks tinkering with it, her small hands coaxing music from its crackling speakers. When it finally played, she'd danced with Lila under the stars, their laughter drowning out the cicadas. That memory flickered now, a faint light against the gymnasium's glare. But the crowd didn't see that girl. They saw her worn shoes, her secondhand backpack, and they judged her for it. Cassidy stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You know, Ellie, not everyone's meant for the spotlight. Some people are better off in the kitchen. Her friend snickered one, snapping a photo, as Ellie clutched her notebook tighter. The click of the camera was soft, but it echoed in Ellie's ears. She didn't speak, didn't look up. Her silence was a shield, but it invited more. A boy tossed a crumpled flyer toward her, letting it bounce off her shoe. Practice for your big debut, he said, grinning as others laughed. Another student, emboldened, nudged Ellie's shoulder as she passed, muttering, Move, you're in the way. The gym's fairy lights twinkled indifferent to the scene. Teachers stood at the edges, their eyes on clipboards or phones, missing the quiet violence unfolding. On social media, the group chat exploded gifs of cartoon hobos, hashtags like "Geo a diner star." Ellie's name trended in their small, cruel corner of the internet, each post a brick in the wall closing around her. She'd seen this before last year, when a new kid was mocked for his accent. She'd wanted to speak up then, but fear had kept her quiet. Now she was the target, and the weight of it pressed harder. Cassidy delivered the final blow, her voice smooth as polished stone. Ellie, seriously, why are you even here? You're not one of us. You're just nobody. The words hung in the air heavy, as the silence that followed. The crowd stilled, some faces uneasy, but no one spoke. Ellie's hands tightened around her notebook. Knuckles pale, her eyes usually soft, flickered with something unreadable. She didn't cry, didn't run. She stood there, a small figure under the glittering lights, her silence louder than their laughter. The gymnasium's energy shifted the crowd's attention, drifting back to their phones, their plans, their lives. Ellie remained a ghost in their midst, her heart a quiet drumbeat. The talent show was hours away, and the stage waited its spotlight, cold and unyielding. She took a step back, her sneakers squeaking faintly, and the world moved on without her, or so they thought. The gymnasium's lights still sparkled, but Ellie Harper stood unseen, a flicker fading in their glow. The crowd had scattered their laughter now, a dull echo leaving her alone with the weight of their words. The polished bleachers gleamed the air thick with the fading scent of perfume, but to Ellie the room felt hollow, as if it had swallowed her whole. At 10 years old, she stood clutching her notebook, its pages creased from her grip, each lyric inside a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. The talent show loomed, and doubt crept in like dusk over her trailer park home. Ellie slipped out the side door, the Texas heat pressing against her skin as she walked the long road back to the trailer. Her sneakers dragged on the gravel, kicking up dust that clung to her faded sweater. Inside her mind, Cassidy's voice looped, nobody, nobody, nobody. Had she been foolish to sign up to think her voice could matter? She pictured the stage, the spotlight, the faces waiting to laugh. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was just the diner girl destined to scrub counters, not to sing. Her chest tightened each breath, a struggle against the weight of their scorn. She paused by a rusted mailbox, its chipped paint flaking under her touch. 2 years ago, on a night when the power went out, Lila had lit a candle and told her a story. Your grandma sang in church even when folks whispered she was too poor to stand up front. Lila had said, her voice steady as the flame. She sang anyway because her heart was full. Ellie had clung to that tale, imagining her grandmother's voice rising above the whispers. Now it felt distant, a story for someone braver. She kicked a pebble, watching it skitter into the ditch. Was she betraying that legacy by doubting herself? Back at the trailer, Ellie sat on her narrow bed, the hum of the box fan filling the silence. The notebook lay open, wildwood flower, staring back in her careful script. She traced the words, her fingers trembling. What if she froze on stage? What if they laughed again? The thought was a stone in her throat, heavy and cold. She closed her eyes, seeing Lila's hands rough from years at the diner, kneading dough with quiet strength. Lila never flinched when customers snapped or tips ran dry. We keep going, she'd say. But Ellie wasn't sure she could. Then, in the stillness, she hummed a single note. It was soft, barely audible, but it steadied her. She opened her notebook and sang a line, I'll twine with my mingles and waving black hair. Her voice wavered, then grew a thread of light piercing the dark. She stopped, startled by its clarity. It wasn't loud, wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She tucked the notebook under her pillow, a small act of defiance against the voices in her head. Tomorrow, the stage would wait, and so would Cassidy's click. For now, she'd sung, and that was enough. The night stretched on the trailer's tin roof, creaking under the weight of a starless sky. Ellie lay still, her heart a quiet pulse. The talent show was hours away at Spotlight, a distant promise. She didn't know if she'd shine or falter, but the song in her chest was stirring, ready to rise when the moment came. Nobody noticed Ellie Harper lingering by the gymnasium's edge, her small frame half hidden in the shadows. The talent show had begun, and the stage pulsed with color neon lights for a dance crew, a glittering keyboard for a pop ballad. The crowd of Winslow Middle School buzzed their cheers, filling the air like static. Ellie, at 10 years old, stood clutching her notebook, its pages worn from her anxious grip. Her faded sweater and patched sneakers marked her as an outsider, but something in her eyes had shifted, a quiet resolve that went unseen. The spotlight waited, and with it a moment none of them expected. The gymnasium was a sea of anticipation, fairy lights twinkling above rows of parents and students in pressed shirts and pastel dresses. Cassidy Wells sat in the front, her sequined skirt catching every glow, her phone ready to capture anything worth mocking. She had posted about Ellie's sad little audition that morning, a blurry photo of Ellie's sign-up sheet with a laughing emoji. The group chat had lit up hashtags like Aegis Diner Star trending among her clique. Now, as a boy finished a drum solo to loud applause, Cassidy leaned toward her friend. Here comes the charity case. She whispered, her voice a blade wrapped in silk. Ellie's name was called Last. The MC, a young teacher with a hesitant smile, stepped to the microphone. And finally, we have Ellie Harper performing Wildwood Flower, a cappella. A murmur rippled through the crowd, some stifling giggles, others raising phones to record the joke. Ellie walked to the stage, her steps slow but steady. The spotlight hit her harsh and unyielding, bleaching her pale face. Her sweater hung loose, her sneakers squeaked faintly, and her hands gripped the notebook like a lifeline. She didn't look at Cassidy, didn't scan the crowd. She closed her eyes, took a breath, and began. I'll twine with my mingles and waving black hair. Her voice rose soft as a breeze over a Texas meadow, clear as a bell in the silent dawn. It wasn't loud, wasn't polished, but it carried a weight that stilled the room. Each note was a story of late nights in a trailer, with no power of Lila's hands kneading dough of a grandmother who sang despite whispers. The crowd's whispers faded, their phones lowered. Cassidy's smirk froze her fingers, pausing mid-text. A teacher in the back, mid-sip of coffee, set her cup down, her eyes wide. Ellie's voice wove through the gymnasium, slipping into the cracks of every guarded heart, raw and unbroken. 2 years ago, Ellie had sung Wildwood Flower at a church potluck, her voice trembling as Lila watched from a folding chair. A woman in a floral dress had approached afterward, her eyes soft. You've got a gift, child, she'd said, pressing $1 into Ellie's hand. Ellie had kept that dollar tucked in her notebook, a talisman of belief. Now, on this stage, that memory fueled her, each lyric a step beyond the laughter that had tried to bury her. The final note lingered delicate as a fading star. Silence held the room, not the cruel hush of boredom, but the reverence of something sacred. Then, a single clap broke through an older man. In the third row, his glasses fogged with tears. Another followed, then a wave. The gymnasium erupted applause, thundering like rain on a tin roof. Cassidy's phone slipped to her lap, her face pale. Her friends exchanged glances, their laughter gone. A woman in a tailored blazer stood, her name tag glinting, Marion Holt, director of the Carver Community Choir. She'd come to scout her daughter's dance act, but now stared at Ellie, her notebook forgotten. Marion stepped forward as Ellie left the stage, her voice low but firm. "Ellie Harper, I'm Marion. Your voice, it's extraordinary. We have a youth program fully funded. I'd like you to audition." Ellie blinked, her hands still clutching her notebook. She glanced at Lila, who sat in the back, her diner apron peeking from her bag, eyes shimmering with pride. Ellie nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, ma'am." The crowd's applause faded, but the air had changed. Ellie walked off, her steps lighter, her notebook a quiet anchor. She didn't gloat, didn't glance at Cassidy. "I came to sing," she said softly to no one but herself. And that's enough. The gymnasium hummed with new whispers, not of mockery, but of wonder. The stage was empty now, but the echo of Ellie's voice lingered, a promise of what was to come. Cassidy Wells stood frozen, but no one met her gaze. The gymnasium, once alive with her clique's laughter, now hummed with a different energy, one that left her stranded. Ellie Harper's voice had silenced the room, her wildwood flower still echoing in the minds of the Winslow Middle School crowd. The fairy lights twinkled above, casting their glow on faces now turned away from Cassidy, their phones idle, their whispers stilled. At 10 years old, Ellie had stepped off the stage, her faded sweater and patched sneakers no longer a punchline, but a testament to something raw and true. The air was thick not with mockery, but with a reckoning none had foreseen. Cassidy's downfall came quietly, not with shouts, but with the weight of eyes that no longer followed her. Moments after Ellie's performance, Marion Holt, the Carver Community Choir director, lingered near the stage, her blazer crisp, her expression unreadable. She approached the talent show organizer, a harried teacher juggling a clipboard. "That girl, Ellie Harper." Marion said, her voice low but firm. "She's exceptional. I'll need her contact for the scholarship program." The teacher nodded, then hesitated, glancing at Cassidy, who stood nearby, her sequined skirt dull under the lights. "Some students were unkind to her," the teacher murmured. Marion's lips tightened. "I see. Perhaps they'll learn from this." The crowd's hypocrisy unraveled like a loose thread. Cassidy's friends, once quick to amplify her barbs, now shifted uncomfortably. A girl in a pastel dress, who'd posted a meme of Ellie's sneakers, slipped her phone into her pocket, her face flushed. Another who'd laughed at the diner. Girl Jibe approached Ellie as she stood with Lila near the gym's exit. "Hey, you were really good," she stammered, her eyes darting away. Ellie looked at her, her brown eyes steady, but not unkind. She nodded, nothing more. The girl shuffled off, her apology hollow against the memory of her silence when it mattered. On the school's group chat, the Diner Star hashtag vanished, replaced by a single post from an anonymous account. "Ellie Harper just owned that stage." Last spring, Ellie had helped Lila plant marigolds outside their trailer, their hands caked with dirt, as Lila shared a story. "When I was your age, kids laughed at my hand-me-downs," she'd said, patting the soil. "But my mama told me, you don't need their applause to bloom." Ellie had kept that close, a seed of strength now sprouting. As she stood in the gymnasium, the weight of that lesson steadied her. She didn't need Cassidy's regret, or the crowd's sudden praise. She'd sung for herself, for Lila, for the grandmother, whose voice had defied whispers. Cassidy tried to reclaim her poise, her voice bright but brittle. It was just a song, she said to a friend, loud enough for others to hear. But the friend turned away, joining a group discussing Ellie's performance. A parent nearby, overhearing, shook his head. "That girl's got more heart than most." He muttered, his words a quiet rebuke. Cassidy's smile faltered, her hands twisting the hem of her skirt. The organizer approached her later, her tone gentle but pointed. "Cassidy, we're reviewing the talent show's code of conduct. Bullying isn't tolerated here. No suspension, no public shaming, just a warning that stung deeper for its restraint." Ellie, meanwhile, stood with Lila, her notebook tucked under her arm. Marion Holt joined them, her name tag glinting as she handed Lila a card. "Your daughter's a rare talent," she said. "The choir scholarship covers everything: lessons, travel, even a stipend. Lila's hands trembled, her diner apron creased from the long day. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes on Ellie, who stood taller, now her silence a quiet power. Ellie didn't gloat, didn't seek out Cassidy's gaze. "I just wanted to sing," she said softly, her voice steady, as she met Marion's eyes. The gymnasium began to empty, parents and students filing out under the Texas dusk. Ellie and Lila stepped into the warm evening, the hum of cicadas greeting them. The talent show was over, but its echo lingered, a shift in the air that promised more than applause. Ellie's path was just beginning, and the world for once seemed ready to listen. For the first time, Ellie Harper felt the evening sun without the blur of tears. The Texas dusk wrapped around her as she stood outside the trailer, her notebook tucked under her arm, its pages no longer a secret. At 10 years old, she'd walked through the fire of laughter and scorn, her voice rising above the din of Winslow Middle School's gymnasium. She thought of the nights she'd doubted herself, the whispers that called her nobody, the weight of patched sneakers on a polished stage. Those moments had carved her, but they hadn't broken her. Ellie remembered Lila's hands rough from diner shifts, guiding her to plant marigolds in the dirt. "You bloom where you're planted," Lila had said, her voice a steady anchor. That lesson took root now, deeper than ever. Ellie hadn't needed the crowd's applause or Cassidy's regret. She'd sung for the girl who hummed in the dark, for the mother who stood when no one else did, for the grandmother whose voice defied whispers. Her worth wasn't in their cheers, but in the quiet truth of her heart. She was enough. She stepped onto the trailer's creaky porch, the sun painting her face in gold. Lila joined her, her diner apron folded, her eyes soft with pride. Ellie opened her notebook, the lyrics of Wildwood Flower, catching the light. She didn't need a spotlight anymore. Her voice, once a whisper, was now a flame that wouldn't fade. If Ellie's story touched you, share your own moment of standing tall in the comments. Hit like, subscribe, and let's keep these stories alive, because every voice deserves to be heard.